Okay, guys, we are going to introduce our next speaker today. I'm pretty sure a lot of you already know him, but if there are words like innovator, leader, the advocate, that's here right now, Ben Fellows. Um, what? YouTuber as well.
Nice.
He runs his the Daily CTO podcast, and he's known for his thought leadership. He is known for mentoring people to succeed in the world of QA. He's obviously the CEO of the Loop QA. His team is actually building a lot of tools and cool cutting edge technology. His team is actually, I feel like, changing the way the world thinks about quality, rewriting the rules of quality. And I don't know how many of you have heard about Cursor. That's one of the emerging technology. So there are a lot of these tools that Ben's team have been working on. Just very interesting fun fact is that he started his journey in Capitol Hill, in the power halls of Capitol Hill. So a lot of the leadership skills, I'm assuming what he learned from Capitol Hill or the nation's capital, he's now using it to build this QA community. So I'm really excited to have Ben here and give him the stage. Thank you, Ben. Let's give him a huge round of applause, guys.
Perfect. So I think I turned the mic on. Is this coming through?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. First off, introductions like that make me wildly uncomfortable, so thank you. Yeah. So my talk is called Testing Should Compound, Not Collide. It's going to be focusing on designing layered testing strategies. So yeah, a little bit about me. So I got into QA largely accidentally, which I feel like is actually more common than one would expect. I worked on Capitol Hill for a couple years out of college. I was like a West Wing kid. If you ever watched The West Wing, that was always the goal. As happens with dreams sometimes, like 6 months in, I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do. So then had the opportunity to join a startup. Very much got to sort of learn how to build a plane and fly it at the same time experience. Did a box office management solution in Ruby on Rails. Over the course of 5 years, we had death by 1,000 cuts, where like no matter how many times we were up till 2 a.m. testing, there would be something that would hit production. I'd get a call to a cell phone at 7 p.m., and it just set me down this journey of trying to understand quality, QA, kind of what this was, coming from this place of like zero. So that was 15 years ago. I, since then, started a QA company 6 years ago now. We have about 15 engineers, so we're bespoke, is the easy way of saying smaller size. I come from the startup world a lot, though, so I'm really curious to sort of ping your guys' ideas when it comes to enterprise and how some of my philosophies and thoughts align with yours. And then in my summary, I fight anxiety publishing YouTube videos. I also fight anxiety right now in this moment. So all my content is an exercise in my own anxiety about trying to put things out there. So would very much love feedback. Okay, so quick question, just because we're going to be doing some live coding in Cursor as we're going. How many people here use Cursor, use like IDEs like that? Okay. Is it accepted in enterprise so far, or is it like, or the large companies is like not so much? Like I'm genuinely curious if like yes, no, maybe so. All right, so sort of accepted. All right. So basically, the 3 goals from this talk going to be how do we prove process and access testing fits across layers. AI seems to be the theme very much so today, and based on every question. So I'm going to try to actually talk more about AI because it seems like that's what most people are interested in. And then how do we build confidence? I'm going to skip over some of these goals because they're a little high level. I'm going to break the talk into 2 kind of core collision points. One is the test pyramid, which before you eye roll, I'm going to not try to just like do all of the stuff that you've heard over the last 15 years because I think it's very, very well documented. But we're going to talk about how AI can really help, I think, us as a community when it comes to understanding unit tests, integration tests, what presents are there, what are not. And then the second piece, which I think is a little bit more of a hidden aspect when it comes to testing, compounding, and not colliding, is your test data strategies. We've had a lot of success in the last year or so trying to make much more stable test data strategies that really compound on each other versus some of the corners that we used to cut. Okay, same thing. I promise I will not give you guys another talk on the test pyramid. Once again, though, I find it wildly valuable. I'm not trying to diminish the impact of it, but you have the test pyramid, right? Everyone here has seen it, end-to-end tests, integration tests, unit tests. As we've all established, though, I think that in many organizations you have unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests that are completely disconnected, and so they don't really build on each other. And the main reason why is because there's a lot of disconnect. And a quick example, just to run everyone through so we make sure we're all talking about the same thing, you have an apply discount method. This is going to have some arguments coming in, your cart total, discount type. By the way, I've been told I talk too fast in presentations, so if I am talking too fast, just tell me to slow down. Your unit tests for this are going to be 1 through 9 here. You're going to have all your business logic tested here. Given a cart total of 100, flat discount of 20, what's the final amount? So this is all your unit tests. You have your integration tests, which are your cart modal, right? The methods are passing data from one method to another. And then lastly, you have your end-to-end tests, right? When you go through, basically does the entire flow work. How it actually goes, and here's the hint. In my experience, QA teams just do all these tests, right? And there's a whole variety of reasons, oftentimes because there's a lack of communication, dev, stuff like that. I don't think I'm talking about a new topic here, which is why I'm sort of going through it fast, but all of these challenges still exist in companies that I work with. White box tests and black box tests are treated as completely different. There's not a ton of process, sync and stuff like that. And there's really two solutions. One is going to be more process focused, and then the second is more access focused. So the process side of things, it's fairly simple. I'm just a huge advocate of actually talk about the white box testing and black box testing at the point of like agile meetings and stuff like that. I don't think that people do it enough. It's kind of shocking to me when a QA and a dev actually talk about what's the impact of a feature and the existing white box tests. But then the other side of it, which is more access focused, is where it's starting to get a lot more interesting. And this is where we'll kind of dive into live code, which is where this starts to become like a terrifying aspect of this, because who knows how this is going to perform. So is that too small for people? Okay. Better? Well, except for the fact that it's like you can't really see anything. It's blown up on my computer right now, so I'm hoping we're going to struggle through it together in that sense. So one of the things that I've been most encouraged about when it comes to AI is its ability to teach me things. And as a QA engineer, one of the things that I've struggled with traditionally in the past is I have developers and they're writing features and they're pushing into this massive code base, and I understand code, but I'm not a full stack developer. I don't want to put in all the time to like try to understand the entire app all of the time. But when it comes to me then thinking about, okay, how do the existence of white box tests, black box tests impact my job, I have started having a lot of success with things like find me the feature where I can create ideas. And while it's, that's not even a great prompt. So this app, while it's looking, I'm going to explain it. This app is a very basic demo app that we use to train some of our engineers on. It's basically this community platform where you can create ideas. You can then create communities ideas and around stuff like that. It's not the world's most complex app. And so one of the interesting things about enterprise here is people saying like, sure, it works for a small app, but does it actually apply to like hundreds of thousands of lines of code? And that's honestly an area that I don't know a ton of, and I'd love your feedback. But I asked it not a great prompt. Find me the feature where I can create ideas. It's first going to grep the code base, which I'm starting to find really interesting. It's starting to grep, it's starting to look. It then is going to give me files, and I can actually click into those files, and I can start to understand it. And it's going to give me a really nice summary of where this feature lives in the back end and the front end. And for me as a QA engineer writing a lot of the end-to-end tests, I can take it a step further, and I can say, white box tests, or let's just even be more specific. What unit tests exist for this feature? Short answer, it should not find any unit tests because there are no unit tests for this. So let's see if it actually finds any unit tests for it. It's going to grep the code base again, trying to find tests. Right, and so one of the interesting things that I find is we've pushed so hard to try to change process and to try to get developers to think about white box testing different ways. But in the last year, having access to this kind of information without a ton of effort has really made it so it found my end-to-end test, actually. So it found end-to-end tests, and it found some stuff, so it's missing unit tests, right? And so now within, 5 minutes of looking through the code, I now can go back to the developer, I can go to my manager or someone like that, and I can say, hey, I'm missing unit tests, or I'm missing integration tests. And for me, it's really changed how we're able to make impact, because we're having evidence, the cost analysis of trying to find this stuff no longer costs as much time and energy. So sort of biggest thing for me coming out of this is access. A lot easier for startups, I think, probably, to get access to code bases. I honestly don't know how like Amazon and Microsoft work when it comes to like what you have access to. But to me, a QA engineer in today's world, if you can get access to this stuff, you get a lot more informed opinions. And then tying this back to how it compounds, now when you're writing your end-to-end tests, you can actually look at, okay, your unit test, your integration test, your end-to-end test, and we actually have the whole picture. Okay. So that was chapter number 1 of the presentation. And just to kind of summarize, and I wanted to go through it quick because the test pyramid is something that I feel like is a well-covered topic, and the main component that I wanted to highlight is that it's not that the philosophy has changed in any way, it's that the access to the data and the coding has changed. I also want to point out there's a slight difference between me and some of the other presentations, which this is mostly about code gen. There's a larger topic here that exists, which is at what point does all of this testing move to like the LLM browser side of things, and as you're no longer writing Playwright because you're now just going through the browser. I think that for me at least, we're in the heyday of I can generate code much faster than I could ever type on a keyboard, particularly because automation lives in a really nicely defined box. And so I'm a little bit worried that everything I tell you is going to be wildly out of date in the next 6 months, because it seems like it's 6 months ago that it's already changing. Okay, so the second chapter of this, which is how test strategies can compound and not collide. The second is test data. So the problem that I find with test data is that it can cause a lot of flakiness, and it's annoying as hell to deal with because of the amount of time and effort it takes to put an app under state. So just to sort of give an explicit example, if we have an event ticketing system and we're writing a bunch of tests around ticket types, well, test data involved is you have to have an organization, you have to have an event, you have to have probably different ticket types, and so you're going to write a bunch of automation tests around that, and so it's taking time and energy to create the event. Maybe you're going through the API, maybe you're seeding the data. Do you have static data? Do you have data factories? Or do you have an ephemeral data environment? Like all of these things have nothing to do with the actual automation of verifying the ticket type. And so people cut corners. What ends up happening is they reuse data from other tests. They basically skip cleanup. And they basically end up doing practices, because it's time and energetic, that ultimately are not going to be super scalable. Why that happens is because it was remarkably tedious, like to write data factories, at least in my experience. Some people might disagree here, but basically what would happen is we would generate hundreds of lines of data for a single test. Then the database schema changes, or a factory changes, or just like we ended up managing code bases just around this that were almost just as big as the actual test automation itself. So what's changed here? Same thing with AI and Cursor. So Cursor has a remarkably good ability, and it's technically not Cursor, it's the LLMs underneath Cursor, have a remarkably good ability to write data factories and control test data when it comes to us and writing data. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump back over. We're going to make a new thread. We're going to go to our factory here, and then let's pull in our schema. And then let's say, write me the missing data factories based on this schema. So what it's going to do is something that would have taken me in the past like multiple days probably to do, I think it's going to write something like 18 data factories, it should. Now this is only going to work 80-ish%, so it's not perfect by any means. You're going to have to go through, you have to tweak, it takes effort, it's not perfect, but it is a significant output forward for us, at least in our experience with it, in just basically writing 80% of the working code as opposed to having a human do it. It's just going to probably generate, we'll see, live coding. So basically what it's doing, anyone who's not as familiar with data factories are just going to basically be ways in which you can avoid having to have static data for each test. These are factories that are built on the schemas. They rely on the schemas. The benefit of a factory is as your schema changes, you can just update your factory, and now all your tests should have updated data objects, right? And so as this is going, what it's doing is it's reading the schema, and it should be producing community-factory.js. I'm also kind of vamping here as this works, so we're going to see how if this continues. And so from there, we can see first factory it generated. There's your whole interface. It's doing more interfaces, right? This is TypeScript, so you'll have all of the interfaces. And then at some point here, we should see our methods, yep. So it's providing some sample data. In this case, we could either change it to Faker or something like that. Alternatively, what we could do is we could even just add in like a for loop to AI and just have it generate some of the data in real time if we wanted with the factory. So this is a single factory, and like, yeah, this is hours and hours and hours of work, personally at least. I mean, some people here might just be much better at engineering than I am, which is super fair. I'm average at best. So when it comes to this, like, it's just time and energy. And it's also more maintainable. Like, we now have these factories being written, but then when this schema changes, what we're doing now is we're just saying, hey, this is a working factory. This schema changed. Can you please update the factory? Now, on that end, I think that like everyone has sort of said this, with great power comes with great responsibility. Like, what's the role of humans? What I most love is I'm not having to memorize like squiggly lines as much anymore. It's not a strength of mine, and I'm not trying to diminish engineering. Like, it's a huge portion, right? The syntax and all these other components. But what I enjoy thinking about is architecture, design, these sort of higher level components. And so what I'm doing is I'm freed up to start to think about, okay, so how do we take these data factories and how do we make fixtures for them, which is a Playwright concept for basically combining seeding and other before each statements before a test. I was going to dive over to fixtures, but it's going a little slow today. The hotel internet seems to be a little bit slower. But I mean, even as it goes slow, it is still producing more code faster for me as an engineer than I could possibly be typing. All right. 15 minutes in, we're not doing terrible. All right, so from that point, I guess I operate slightly differently. Anyone have questions so far? I'm going to put you all on the spot since you are watching me. No one has questions so far? All right, fair enough. Keep going. Okay, so as this factory goes, what we're going to do is we're going to stop this. And let's say this. Let's go ahead and say, great, now combine these factories and make a fixture for my Playwright suite that creates a seeded environment with a couple ideas, communities, users. Okay, so we've created factories. We've now given it the prompt to create a database seeded environment. It should, if it does what's doing what I think it should, is it should create a fixture that Playwright rule is. From a compound and not collide, and if you're wondering, okay, like how does this fit into the presentation? This goes back to Playwright, generally speaking, argues that every test case should be completely isolated. It should have all of its own data. It should have all of its own dependencies. If we're in those like edit ticket type test cases, which we talked about as part of the example, Playwright would argue, and I think a lot of other framework and automation frameworks argue, okay, so you should have its own org, its own event, its own ticket type. You don't have to be necessarily dogmatic with it. Like, you don't necessarily need completely isolated organizations when it comes to how the test case might go. Like editing ticket types, you probably just need independent events. But when it comes to sort of the strategy overall, a fixture will allow for that to be much more possible. You have a fixture that spins up before each test case. It allows for completely isolated data, and that way the tests are not stepping on each other nearly as much. They're going. I will admit that this is going slower than normally when I practice this. So, all right, we're going to create the data factory. All right, good example. It's doing something slightly that I don't want it to do. Rather than actually seeding data, I believe the prompt is actually just creating a mock context of the my database, which in this case is convex. So this goes back to, like, you can't just use AI blindly. This is not doing what I want. I think this goes back to one of the other themes that people said is like, do we have jobs? Do we not have jobs? I would argue that we still have jobs, but they're changing very much. Like, our job is to now recognize that AI just produced something that was not part of the plan of what we were trying to produce, and instead correct it, as opposed to trying to actually write the code itself. Okay, so while that's going, I'm going to continue on. So what's changed is that. So the output of that, as we're talking, is we've seen exponentially more reliability as well as maintainability in our test suites. When we take over a test suite on occasion, there's a whole variety of kind of situations that we'll walk into. The most common is that each test case is actually just like spinning up all of the data as part of its own test case. In those cases, we've actually been able to cut the code and some of the size of those suites by upwards of 60%. That's not always the case by any means, but this example came from a suite where every test case was using the UX UI to basically put the suite under test into its own place, and we were basically able to cut that back. We dramatically reduced flakiness because all of the tests have independent data, and we're able to cut down the runtime significantly, specifically in that situation because we also had the runtime being basically that the test data was spinning itself up. All right, going back, what we're going to see, has it made its fixture yet? It's created a README. All right, interesting example. So in this case, it actually failed to create a fixture, which is really, maybe it created a fixture. Oh no, I just misread it. Data seeder. Okay, so just call it a fixture, which is fine. Mock data storage is doing a get data, then it's seeding. Cool, okay. So from there, so what we've done, right, is we've basically used the AI in this case to take the schema, it's created independent data factories, it's then created a fixture, and then I believe it actually proactively for us took the fixture and added it to the test case. Yeah, so now the test case is using the fixture, right? So I think someone mentioned prompt engineering. I'm a big fan of the idea of prompt engineering when it comes to stuff like this. I don't really love the term vibe coding. I think it kind of diminishes the whole engineering aspect when it comes to a term, but at the same point, I think everyone has their own opinions on it. My argument and my takeaway is what it built, even though it doesn't work out of the gate, still would take me days to build myself, and it's going to take me significantly less time to figure out how to make all of this sort of work, tweak, stuff like that, and go from there. Okay. So, next steps on all of this. Experiment. So I wanted to spend just like 2 minutes talking about how important I believe experimentation is with all of these components. 3 years ago, ChatGPT had like a 500 character limit window. It was like you couldn't put in more than a paragraph. A month and a half ago, I would have told you like Gemini's model 2.5 was like best, and then Sonnet 4.0 dropped, and then like Cursor last night just pushed a huge update, so now we're gonna go experiment with that. There's kind of a sense of whack-a-mole with all these tools, I think is kind of my general takeaway. Like it feels exhausting trying to figure out like what we're doing right now is gonna be out of date in a month, and like do we spend time learning it, or is it completely like worthless? What I've found is a couple tried and true things. I tend to like Cursor and then experiment with the LLMs. That being said, I don't think that that's like has to be. I like the idea of like once a month-ish is kind of the rhythm that I'm finding when it comes to experimentation. Like I'll choose a tool set for a month, I'll do it. Now, granted, I think I live in a very different fast-paced world, so I'm also very curious when it comes to enterprise. Like you guys might say like there's no world in which you're changing tool sets that fast. I have yet to find the balance when it comes to finding sort of the experimentation component. I'd love feedback. That being said, I tend to subscribe to the idea that this is here to stay. It's only going to get better. Sort of a couple final thoughts on that. I think that a lot of this suite in the next 6 months to a year might be wildly out of date. Like I struggle when I think about Playwright and the fact that we're writing Playwright and I'm interacting with the DOM. It's like I can produce more test cases than I've ever been able to produce, and they're really good and they're really high quality. But now we're talking about an MCP server run by Playwright Core, and it's basically like, okay, in 6 months, you're no longer gonna have to run the DOM. So experiment, stay one step ahead, just keep trying to sort of figure out how to use this is my perspective. And then as we wrap up, oh, I have 7 minutes still, and I don't have 7 minutes left of content here. So I might have to rely on some of your guys' Q&A. as we wrap up, you can see, right, like in this case, someone asked about like, can it write test cases? I'm genuinely curious. So let's do this. Let's say, okay, now using the factories and the fixture and your knowledge of the feature, write me a test case file comprehensively testing it. So it's going to do it. It's going to update. We're going to see how it does. So my perspective and what it's going to do is it's going to probably do like 80% of the good work. It's going to give you a lot of test cases that you would probably choose as a human, which is great. It's going to give you some test cases that you'd probably not choose as a human, which is also great. And then it's going to miss some things, which is why we have job security. And we're going to then sort of basically fix it, clean it up. But it's, to me, an amplifier more than anything. If you have people on your team who maybe struggle and they don't necessarily write great code and you're sort of working with them, unfortunately, I think this amplifies their ability to introduce a lot more code, and it can kind of make your life a little bit more challenging. On the other hand, your rock stars on your teams, it's going to amplify their ability to impact it really, really well. So to me, I go back to thinking about amplifier. All right. I talked faster. I technically have 5 more minutes. I'm curious if anyone just like wildly disagrees with me or agrees with me. Like any immediate thoughts? Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Because you have a complete code available, you have a complete data set available, which you need to write a unit test.
Yep.
But if it's a web interface where that DOM structure is not available to you,
Yeah.
so how you will use AI to generate the complete playwright test case when accessibility snapshot or a DOM structure is not available to you?
When the DOM structure is not available. So do you have access to the code base in that situation still or no? Oh, interesting. Most of what I do is web-based. So in that situation, I have less expertise.
So I have a solution available for that. Means I'm also from a playwright and I'm using VS Code with the GitHub Copilot instead of a cursor.
Okay.
And I developed I use the Playwright MCP also, and I developed my own MCP servers where you can generate a complete test case using Playwright MCP, and it will also auto-generate a pull request for you.
Yeah.
With all the details. So Playwright MCP is very strong in that case if you want to do a web integration testing.
Oh, sorry.
And the same way means cursor is working, you can use a GitHub Copilot with the Sonnet or Opus 4.0. It's very strong combination.
Yeah.
So for integration tests, this scenario will work, but if you want to use a web integration, then you have to use a Playwright MCP for sure.
Yeah. So I go back and forth. I've had some success when it comes to like access to the code base, writing a lot of end-to-end tests, and like without even having to open the browser anymore, because when I understand the code base and I know the code base, I just pull in all the HTML files, and it does a really nice job of just writing POM files and then writing all the end-to-end tests. For those of you who aren't familiar, Playwright has 2 core libraries. You have Playwright Test and you have Playwright Core. The MCP servers that are being talked about is basically Playwright Core. There was a device called the Rabbit that was like an orange square that kind of got super popular, and then it came out behind the scenes that they were just writing Playwright scripts actually to try to do a lot of the things that it was doing. And I actually think that the idea was great, but it was like a year and a half too early, because now like Playwright's MCP servers and stuff like that can actually do a lot of these components. Great question. Any other thoughts, questions? Go for it.
Even if you're not using cursor or a GitHub Copilot, you can use a Playwright CodeGen for generating the test case manually, and then you can refactor using the cursor.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Sorry, there was another topic.
Okay, so compound versus collide.
Yes.
I deduced from your talk that a collision, when you're talking about collisions, you're talking about data segregation, dependencies per test, and this kind of segregation really is what it is, versus a compound, which is an addition. You're adding things.
Yeah.
And I think you've got another idea here, and that is sharing data.
Yep.
Right? And so I'm trying to tease out what's the difference between compound as adding data
Yep.
and compound as sharing data that doesn't need to be segmented.
Yeah. That's fair. So to echo your point, and this goes back to, I appreciate feedback about me as a speaker too, because I've not done a ton of these things. The compound versus collide, there was two aspects of it. One is, when it comes to the first half of the presentation, I see a tremendous amount of wasted effort from a lot of QA engineers retesting things that they don't necessarily have to be retesting, but it's not necessarily our fault. Like, we don't have access to things, we don't know what's in the white box level, we don't know what's been covered. But then also I talked to a bunch of QA engineers who don't know any better. I'm imagining, since this group is here at this conference, you're all a very well-educated group of people when it comes to QA practices, but like, that first example of those 9 test cases that could have been covered by unit tests, and instead you have a QA engineer doing the same thing, my perspective is, if you have something like Cursor and there's a good dev who actually writes those unit tests, you can spend a little bit of time, a couple minutes, and you can be like, hey, where's that feature? What are the unit tests? And it very much informs that ability of how you as a QA engineer can do it, and that compounding effort. Like, when I talk about QA, I think about it as an orchestra, and it really compounds, as opposed to what sort of happens, which is you have all these musicians sitting in their own rooms reading the same sheet music, thinking that we're all trying to do it. When it comes to data, it's very similar in the sense of, and it's like the shared data versus not shared data. So it's similar, but it doesn't stack on as much. So when I'm talking about test data compounding versus colliding, I think by necessity sometimes in the past, people have cut a lot of corners with data for short-term gain that ends up making long-term a lot more collisions. And when it comes to compounding, what I'm trying to advocate for is, you now have AI tools that can really do a lot of the foundational components to keep data isolated in a way that's a lot more, honestly, more approachable than it ever used to be. And so you can have that kind of compounding component. But I appreciate the sort of clarifying question, if that makes any sense. Yeah. So, yeah, go for it.
If it's a compound test, if it's a component, and if it's a React or a Next.js, you can use a Playwright for a component testing now.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, you can use it for sure.
Yeah, so instead of relying on a unit test or an integration test, better to use a component testing, which will keep all the compounds together and do a end-to-end testing for those components.
Yeah. So like, when it comes to like unit test, integration test, there's like all your API, your component tests. Like, there's so many contract tests. Like, there's a ton of different things. So oversimplification. Technically, I'm at time right now, so now we can formally go into the QA session. I appreciate you guys all filling 5 minutes of my time, and maybe what we'll do is we'll give you a little bit extra time to go like actually have a bathroom break and stuff like that. Go for it.
Right, I'll start the actual Q&A. So my question is...
I'm supposed to stay on stage. Sorry, wandering.
Okay, now we're good. My question is, so you're generating code and you're generating data from that code. So how do you go about validating either?
Running it primarily, reviewing it. It's an interesting thing, because I also know that you're in the test data space, which is a fun one. To me, it goes back to like trust and verify. Like, trust but don't verify. Or verify. What's that saying that I just butchered? Yes. So, like, to me, what I'm viewing it as is an engineer, I have the same level of responsibility of ownership. When I push this code, it's my code. I don't get to go and say, like, well, I didn't actually generate it. Like, it's not my responsibility. Like, I pushed it. My perspective is that it should be producing the same code that I would produce as an engineer. It's just typing 1,000 times faster than I could possibly type. So when it comes to that sense of, like, how do you verify it? It's changed my time and energy. Like, no longer am I sitting and writing as much code. I'm still spending a couple hours now going through it, thinking about it, verifying it, because I still have that same level of responsibility and ownership when it goes to my manager to say, nope, I take responsibility. So the short answer is it's a lot of work still to like go through and verify it, but it's just a different kind of work, if that makes any sense. There's a question right behind you.
Yep, so you talked a lot about generating more and more tests. Have you seen any like long-term or have any thoughts on like the long-term impacts on the maintenance costs of those tests and all this, additional production?
Yeah, so on that front, it's gotten a lot better. So there was this thing playing around, like they were talking about the vibe coding earlier. With software development, in my experience is there's this moment in time where like AI starts to fail really substantially. So it's like, it's really, really helpful, and then like it drops off this cliff where the context window is just like so crazy big. Similar to like code bases with test automation in that sense. I would imagine there is a suite that gets big enough to where like it's just horrible to maintain. But like we have a couple suites that like, I have no idea if you all are gonna laugh at me, but like 4,000 or 5,000 total tests and stuff like that. And it's like, if you know what you're doing, you provide some context windows, stuff like that, like it's able to make the changes pretty effectively based on the instructions. And to me, it's only getting better. Like the models that were struggling to do something 3 months ago, the moment in time that kind of blew my mind was when Gemini's million token context window, and I could take a whole DOM and just drop it in, because like that changed the world for me. This was like 6 months ago, and now I could just basically take a POM file and generate it in 10 seconds, as opposed to what I was still having to do, which is go through the DOM, find the specific area, copy just that area and stuff like that. I sort of ducked the question, I guess, other than just saying I think it's going to be maintainable. But we've had a lot of success. Like if we go and we just do an experiment here where we basically say, let's change the schema in some way and see what it does. Update the idea schema so we can then see if you can, I don't want to prompt it. All right, let's just say update the idea schema. And then what we'll do is we'll just basically tell it, hey, there's a new updated idea schema. Can you go find the factories for it and update that as test cases? And in theory, it should do that. But it's also going to tell me that I probably didn't give it enough. Yeah, it's saying, what would you like to add? How about this? I will, rather than just doing a bunch of lab coding on that, I will play with it a little bit more and get back to you about that. But the short answer is maintainability for us has been interesting. It's also made us question things like dry and some of these other concepts, because like AI has different constraints than a human mind. Like human minds like organized things because we have a limited capacity to do that. What we're experimenting with, and same thing, I'm really interested in people's feedback, is like, can you start, if you're starting to think about how AI helps, does that also take away some of the constraints that we are limited to because of our capacity to do things? Like we need organized things, but if AI can just grep an entire code base, hey, it doesn't hurt as much if things are repeated 4 or 5 times in the code base, as long as the AI can find it every time, right? And there's a huge if there, which is if it's good enough to do that, but in mid-sized code bases, it's more and more close to that stuff. So it's also started to make us question, like, how do we think about some of these core tenets of coding that we're treating like our engineers, like do dry, do some of these other things, versus like, all right, well, AI is just going to find the instances where it does this, so why are we thinking about it the same way? So instead, we're shifting more to like descriptions and these things to be able to allow AI to better find some of the aspects in the code base. I'm enjoying it. I'm wildly off the collide versus the collision thing, so I'll appreciate the questions. I hope this is valuable to people. Any other questions? Yeah, go for it.
This tool will help you to generate a lot of test cases. So is there a way, like if I give a high level architecture overview, will it give me the critical use cases? So
Yeah.
or else if there is a user paths that I define, will it give me the critical test cases?
Yeah, so let's do this just for the sake of this. Let's take a front end piece of code. So this is like where it has like community. We'll do a new thread. So we're going to give it front end code and we're going to give it back end code. And then let's say based on this front end and back end code, write me tests in English for the code. Don't code anything. So people are going to probably say if you use code to generate code, that if you introduce a bug or you introduce a missing acceptance criteria, then like on that case, it's going to be wrong. And this goes back to, as a human, we still take responsibility. But like this is how we're doing a lot to operate. Like, is a starting point. It's going to give us a lot of like unit test stuff. Then you have some more unit test stuff. You have basically mutation tests. Should throw ideas when the error doesn't exist. So it's generating for this page. What is this? We're at 100 tests now. Chat tab should display the channel list. And all of these, like knowing this app, all of these are valid test cases. So like it goes back to, it's my perspective is it wrote that a lot faster than I could write that. And so even if it missed like 15, 20% of it, like my time and energy is no longer going into writing these, it's going into reviewing these, and then basically just sort of prompting it and controlling it. And it did that without ever opening a browser, which is really interesting. Like you no longer even have to open the browser, it just did that by looking at the code. So if you compare this against the acceptance criteria that a product person is handing you, and it's the same QA test in general, then like, to me, that's a huge value add. There's a question in the back.
Just gonna say, what LLM are you using?
Sonnet 4.0. I bounce between Sonnet 4.0 and Gemini 2.5. I treat the LLMs almost like two different engineers, where one will get stuck on a LLM, and it'll get stuck on a problem, and then you just bring a different LLM in, and oftentimes the other LLM will solve the problem. Like it's an odd thing where they have different strengths. To me, I like Sonnet 4.0 right now, but every other week it feels like one of them's beating someone else. Go for it.
So you've introduced the idea of you're using AI to generate your tests. And you mentioned kind of like this idea of like we have 5,000 tests that'll run. So for me, what I'm seeing is, hey, I've got these 4,000 tests, but I'm running right now. You're kind of going to the assumption that 100 of them they pass.
Yeah.
You know, and you're like generating all this data and generating all these tests, but nothing ever passes 100%.
No, it doesn't.
So what happens to the point? Like, what are you going to use when you have this ever-increasing workload? Let's just say 2% of them fail.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
How am I going to analyze all this? Because that's the problem I have, is that we have people that now have to look at 2% of X.
Yeah.
And that amount of time it takes is a lot. And how do you trust that the tests that you're coming back are easy to interpolate based on your results? Or what can you use to really look at these results now? Because I can't spend 10 minutes per X test on my team because I don't have enough time in the day.
No, agreed. And I think there's this weird thing, which is like when you're advocating about AI, it's like there's this perception in some ways of like I don't know, like that we're ignoring human reality. And it goes back to like I'm not saying that we should do something that's necessarily going to create an impossible situation. Like, and the honest answer is the only way probably to do that at scale, if you're talking about tens of thousands of tests, is to have some kind of an AI system that's evaluating the AI system, because there's literally no way that a human can do that. And so like what I'm talking about here is like, how do we, within reason, increase coverage? Because one of the things that I will say though as a QA engineer is I constantly feel like there's more pressure to test more things that I'm physically able to test. And so it goes back to like, I don't want to create an impossible situation for us, but if I can create 5 times the number of tests, not 100 times, but 5 times the number of tests and get more coverage and have just shift some of the burden to, okay, now my time is going to go into that, but I'd much rather take the trade-off of my time and energy is going into trying to figure out how to evaluate that than having none of the tests at all. But to your point, like, I think there's this concept of like, if you're up here just yelling AI and everything like that, it's like, it's not, you can't generate like millions of tests. Like there are limits, right, based on some of the constraints. Other than just like, yes, you're right, is kind of the answer.
Well, I guess it's really just like, what do we, the next step is really how do you use, can you use AI to reduce the analysis time afterwards? And that's
We've had some success. So what we'll do is we'll fine train models and do like context-based models. It's a completely different talk, but basically you can take a model, give it the whole product requirements, and have it then test. And for example, determining if it's a bug or not a bug, we've had some success, but it goes back to like, where does this end? Like, where's the human component? I think we're at time, aren't we? Do we have time or no time? Okay.
Thank you so much, Ben. This was really exciting. Yeah. Huge round of applause for Ben, please.
Sorry I ran out of content. I talked faster than I expected to talk.
No. That's really good. And thank you, everybody. Those were some really interesting questions. Thank you. And with that, Ben, we have something small for you for your contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.